Do you have any apologies? Okay. Okay, welcome everybody to this Strategy and Resources Policy Committee meeting for the 15th of July 2024. First of all, agenda item 1 is welcome introductions and safety information. So first of all, I'm going to welcome the members of the committee and I'm going to briefly ask them to introduce themselves. Starting myself, my name is Councillor Tony Dyer and I'm the chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee. If we then start with Caroline and then go up the front and then back down the other side and give Councillor Ripperton a chance to sit down.
Hello, I'm Councillor Caroline Gooch. I'm the Vice Chair of Strategy and Resources.
Councillor Heather Mack.
Councillor Annie Supper-Townsend.
Abdul Malik, Councillor for Ashley Ward.
Councillor John Glandris for Stoke Bishop Ward.
Councillor Tom Ennard, Horfield Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Ellie King, Hillfields Ward.
Councillor Tim Rippington, Brislington East Ward. Thanks.
Thank you, and I'll allow officers to introduce themselves as and when they speak to their appropriate item. Also, Paul, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Paul Martin, I'm the Interim Chief Executive.
And Ian.
Ian Hurd, Policy Committee Coordinator.
Thank you, everyone. Next thing to mention is that this meeting is being webcast. And then I'll quickly go on to safety information. And in the event of the alarm sounding, and we're not expecting a fire test, but so if the alarm sounds, please leave the room calmly via the lobby area and main front door of City Hall. Turn right once you're through the doors, walk down the ramp towards the cathedral, and the assembly point is in front of the cathedral. Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item number 2. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I can see that all members are present and correct, so no apologies. Agenda item number 3. Committee members, do you have any declarations of interest relevant to this committee? Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. The minutes were circulated to all members. If any member wishes to suggest an amendment to the wording of the minutes, they should be very specific and precise about any suggested new wording, because any changes that made and agreed to the minutes must be very clear. Does anybody have any comments about the minutes of the previous meeting? Excellent. I'll take the minutes as approved then. Agenda item number 5, Chair's announcements. I have no Chair's announcements at this point. Agenda item number 6 is public forum. No public forum questions have been received in time for this meeting. Agenda item number 7, therefore, is the quarterly performance report for quarter 4 2023-2024. This report provides details on the business plan theme summary reports and outcomes from the thematic performance clinics for Q4 23-24 and highlights areas of additional performance improvement support. There are no decisions to be taken for this report, which is for information. I would now like to invite Tim Barwick to introduce and outline the report and introduce his colleagues when he does so.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, good afternoon, members.
As set out, this is the Q4 performance report for the year 2023-24. This effectively is the year-end outturn and will include details of measures where we only have an annual measure. So this is probably the key update of the year on action tracking. I'll hand over to colleagues in a moment. I'm joined by Nick Smith, who is our Strategic Intelligence and Performance Manager, who will talk you through the detail of the report. A couple of things by way of highlight from myself. We have 7 corporate themes tracked across our performance framework that are the themes set out in our corporate strategy. Of those, 2 of the themes are on schedule at the end of the year, but 5 are now behind schedule. But with that said, just a little over 80%, 83% of the actions set out in the annual business plan for the year were completed. So 59 of 71 actions were completed, but some of those left undone do mean those themes are slightly behind where we would have wanted them to be. What you will note, and this has been something of an annual trend, is that doesn't necessarily translate to overall high performance against our longer term metrics. Those metrics are typically aligned to the corporate strategy, that sort of 5-year picture, rather than just the annual business plan, so that they are a longer term view. But nevertheless, we do tend to see us finishing years at about half of those at the level we would expect them or want them to be to meet our targets. This year, slightly below that, so 46% of measures that have targets are better or on target, 54% have been below target. We also have city outcome measures, which are those very long-term trends where the council may not be directly responsible for the outcomes directly. And 40% of those were on or better than target. But members may recall when we set the performance framework going forwards, we've removed targets for those in future as the council has such limited influence. So whilst we'll continue to track those city outcomes in future, you won't see targets. This is the last time we'll be sort of presenting that on a target basis to you. So with that said, I'll hand over to Nick Smith now to talk you through some of the highlights from the report.
Thanks, Tim. As Tim noted, this is Q4, and just for clarification, the Q4 report, as this is last year, is only coming here to the SRC committee as the overview of performance. For Q1 onwards, a version will go to all 8 committees. Something different there. That's all right. Overall, there's over 170 different metrics of different kinds, actions, performance metrics, city outcomes. So what we have in the summary report here is just an attempt to highlight where the key points to note are. Tim's already given the overview. If in terms of the point that's on screen, I know we can't see lots of detail there, but if we pull that down to the table underneath this one here, which is on the next page down, then that gives, so for each, there are 7 themes in the corporate strategy and 7 themes in the business plan, obviously the same, which are closely aligned to the policy committees, not exactly, but they're very closely. So for each of those, there's a couple of different headlines that were given. For children and young people, it highlights that there was more needed on the auditing the social work records. It's got the education, health and care plans that no, they were just under target, but very close to target. The target being 50%, although much better than they had been the previous year. Now, similarly, there's then the economy and skills. We've got a headline there about young people who are not in education, employment or training, which was, again, slightly behind target. Whereas the apprenticeship levy, the council's own apprenticeship levy, had improved significantly during the year, and that finished well above the target. So positive one there. Moving on to environment and sustainability, the theme. I'm just going through a couple of key points, and then obviously we'll have a chance to go through any details there. Environment and sustainability, they're looking at the emissions, both the council's own CO2 emissions and then the emissions for the city overall. Better than expected, no, better than target for the council, significantly worse for the city overall. That data is in arrears though. Moving on to healthcare and well-being, we've got positives on the integrated care strategy, although the performance measures about transforming care in adult social care, positive performance in them, but all behind where the target was set to be due to increased demand during the year for adult social care. And we weren't able to get data on the life expectancy indicators due to Public Health England delays for those ones, but they are still in the year coming. Homes and communities, we've got a few points that were noted there. The affordable housing delivery and starts on site were both above target. However, the number of council homes with an EPC rating as required ended significantly worse than target for the year, and there's also a point there about council house repairs being outstanding, and the data quality point being looked at. And I'll just note, if we get to that point later, Craig Cook, my colleague here, is here for looking at any particular details you've got regarding that metric or anything in the council house repairs area. Transport and connectivity, we've got one highlight about road safety and using police data that we're provided with on the number of people killed or seriously injured, and how there's a note that is, that has been rising, and we believe that e-scooters, incidents related to e-scooters, is the particular cause behind the rise in that number. It's a small number, of course, but it is rising. And again, my colleague Mark is here for any questions you may have on that. These were the 2 points that were noted as we went through the agenda setting process with councillors. And satisfaction with road services also noted was significantly worse than target, which is a national issue. And then the final theme is the effective development organisation, where we've noted a few things. Obviously, it's worth noting that preparing for committee model, that was done, as we're now evidencing. Where increased the percentage of young people in the council's workforce, that ended the year significantly worse than target, although there is further work being done to attract new people, particularly through apprenticeships. And a positive there on the final one that's noted, internal complaints escalated from stage 1 to stage 2. That increased significantly during the year, where in Q3 it had been significantly worse than target, and in Q4 it ended significantly better than target due to some internal work that was done there. So that's a snapshot of key things by theme. And I noted that there were 2 points that were previously highlighted. So it's just to see if there's any particular questions now from the committee.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions or comments? Councillor Mack.
Well, I will take the opportunity of Mark being here for road safety, just as interest as you're here. So, the e-scooters point was really interesting. I guess maybe I'm hopeful here. Is it serious injuries from e-scooters or more minor injuries? Because obviously this, I guess it does say killed or seriously injured. It doesn't necessarily talk about this. You don't necessarily see the severity when you just look at figures. E-bikes, I think it's great, and if people are choosing to use e-bikes instead where they are available, although they're not, I don't think there's as many e-bikes as there are e-scooters. And I guess there's a bigger picture on that of, do we think that having scooters and different methods of travelling has a broader public health benefit that might be more significant than a number of incidents, depending on what that number is? Sorry, a number of questions there, but it's a very interesting subject.
Hi. I suppose first up, my role's changed since we last met. I'm now Group Manager for Road Safety, so the area committee stuff that we've talked about beforehand, now passed on. With the data, it's about 100 a year that we've had through the police information, and it's about 10% of our killed or seriously injured and 10% of our slight casualties from across the city. So it's not insignificant. Absolutely, yeah, the numbers are quite low, and the data does fluctuate year on year. We're talking 1,000 collisions a year or casualties a year, roughly. So a small change makes change. And numbers have gone down a little bit this year. I think this data was based on 2022. We've just closed 2023, and we are a little bit down. We're still above target where we would be. But in terms of the e-scooter collisions, they're going to be very, very underreported in the information that we've got from the police. A lot more is going to be through hospital and the information that they would collect, and we don't have that information yet. Hopefully the new road safety team that's set up will have time to be able to delve into that and get a lot more information around what's occurring and how we can really target that and deal with that. Yeah, I think the underreporting for e-scooter collisions casualties is probably greater than for cycling. We need to, I think we need to look into that, but from reports, unconfirmed reports from people talking to hospital admission staff, is that they're far in excess of what we see. I think someone said the other day that from the previous contract with Voy, hospitals were seeing sort of 10 times as many than were reported to Voy. So it's a big difference in that score, and it's a difficult one for us then to work out exactly what's happening and how we can address that. Whether or not those people who are getting injured riding scooters would have done a different mode of transport and got injured through that, we just don't know. They might have been cycling and had along the same corridor and had the same issue. We don't know. We need to really delve into the detail to do that, and hopefully we can do that moving forward. There was another point and I've completely forgotten it. Sorry.
I actually saw 4 on an e-scooter yesterday, which was, even by my standards, what you see out there was a record. My other point was, sorry, not really fair to ask you this, but comparing the accidents and the risks there and potential public health benefits, because of, I know it's not the most active travel, but it's a travel that's not in a motorised polluting vehicle. Can you see that how the benefits and the risks compare?
Yeah, there clearly is. Any more active travel that we can do is clearly going to have a benefit from that side, and it's something that we need to look at more when we revise the safe systems approach to road safety that we need to do, and looking towards Vision Zero and Zero KSIs moving forward, not just in terms of collisions, but the impact transport has on people's health and moving forward. As I said, we don't know how many people are moving from cars to using e-scooters. There's thought it's about 30% roughly of the e-scooter users have come from vehicles. Others are moving from walking, cycling and public transport. So it's difficult to judge, I think, what impact that's going to have on that side of things. I don't really have that answer, I'm afraid, but that's as close as we've got at the moment. We need to do a lot more work with TIER and others to try to work that through and see how we can improve that moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bernard.
I'm conscious Homes and Houses Livery is meeting on Friday, but I just want to ask a couple of questions about the repairs data, because I understand there's now been some data cleansing of the records. So could you just confirm what the actual Q4 position was for the backlog?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Reynard. So the figure does look considerably high. As you've said, the service have gone away and tried to categorise those repairs, define what those repairs should be in line with the tenant satisfaction measures, which is proved to be a real benefit, because there's some orders in there which aren't categorised as a responsive repair. We look down through that list and categorise. There's some that can be completed, can be cancelled, and then also need to be checked. So this figure is significantly lower, and we'll see that come through. However, we do anticipate it to stagnate slightly in Q1, as the data was obviously from 31st of March backward, and the new data is coming into it. Although there's significant resource put into place now, and the spotlight into the area for social housing has been a real benefit, and we're going to see a significant decrease in this as orders are completed, and then we can focus the resources accurately on the actual responsive repairs to benefit residents.
Thanks. Really helpful. Do you know what the figure was, though, in terms of what the actual backlog was? Because I think we were told about 11,000, weren't we?
Yeah, so that's accurate at the moment. I wouldn't want.
So that's at the moment rather than the Q4 position. Okay.
Yeah. It's significantly lower than 16,000. There's lots more work to be done, and I'm optimistic in the next reporting we're going to see a significant decrease.
Fine.
But we're just mindful that we are going to see some come back in. So.
That's fine. No, it's helpful. One more question, if I may. Could you just for the benefit of the whole committee, just roughly how many repairs the service complete annually?
About 75,000.
Thank you.
Councillor Wibbington.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just tying this back to the risk log that we're looking at later on, there is, under children and young people, there's a risk that has been the highest state of risk now for for over a year, but and that is just for everybody's clarity. That's children placed in unregistered accommodation, but it doesn't come up here as a point of focus, as something that we are not moving fast enough upon. Does that mean that we're moving as fast or faster than we had planned to on that particular sphere, and yet we're still 4 quarters on at the highest possible risk?
So what we're looking to do is, we have created and about to implement a risk prioritization tool. So where we'll go through the data accurately and at pace, then prioritize on risk, which will capture demographic, asset building type, and a whole host of other factors that we can share at a later date if it's of a benefit. And then we can prioritize those against high, medium and low risk, and make sure that we apply the existing and new resources to the highest risk first and at pace.
And
sorry,
yeah,
but
following as well, because the specific question there, I understand with a children and young people's service question, that particular indicator isn't part of the business plan metric, so that's why it's not covered within the business plan. It obviously is a very important operational metric that the service are looking at, and that is recorded through other reports, but it's not in the business plan, so it's not one of the metrics that we have in this particular version of the dashboard.
So it's not that we're saying we're on course to do everything in time, it's just that it's not covered by this report at all. Okay, thanks.
And I believe there's a report on that item coming to your audit committee on Monday as well. Councillor Stafford Townsend.
Thanks. I had a follow-up question from Heather's questions about the active travel and tier. E-bikes aren't allowed on the Bristol to Bath cycle path at the moment, I think. Is there any update on the changes to that being something that's permitted?
I think there was a meeting last week, which I wasn't at, unfortunately, but there was certainly a discussion with Sustrans and our parks team around what we can do to allow that, and how we move forward. Certainly at the moment, e-scooters aren't allowed on the railway path because it's up to the landowner's consent. So that's where that falls, and that's still currently the position from Sustrans, as I understand it, on their element. So that sort of hits the rest of it, really. In terms of e-bikes, I think they are allowed because they're still classed as a bicycle. So I was told that they were allowed and that no one had an issue with that. So I'd have to go back and check that, but that's what I found out, as I thought last week.
All right, fantastic, thank you very much. And I have another question about something unrelated to transport, but to under the economy of skills part of the chart, it references sort of the percentage of 16 to 17-year-olds who are NEET and not in education or work or training. I was wondering what connection there is between that figure and our young people who have special educational needs and the lack of provision that we have for a significant amount of young people in that category as well, what the connection is between those two figures.
I'm sorry, I'm afraid I don't know how much the crossover there is between children with special educational needs and certainly the not in education and employment training is specific to 16 and 17-year-olds. On this metric, we do also have that for children who are 18 and 19, the same measure. In terms of special education needs, we'd have to go and look at the data and come back to you if there's any crossover we're aware of there.
Oh, it'd be interesting, I think, to look at that data, because I think there would probably be a connection or a correlation potentially between the two figures. It'd be interesting to look at. Thank you.
Councillor Malik.
Chair, I just want to ask really maybe firstly for the timeline of when these themes would be aligned with the committee structure that we have. That's one thing that I'm struggling with at the moment. And secondly, with regards to the report on healthcare and wellbeing, page 28 talks about the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, the OHID, have delayed the release of the data around life expectancy. Just wondering when that report would be coming in and how it would be reported back. Thank you.
So just to pick up on your first question about the themes, the time when we could have an opportunity to align the corporate strategy themes to committees would be at a review of the corporate strategy itself. That the current corporate strategy approved by full council lasts until 2027, but I believe at the start of the system we did say within sort of the 6 months or so that we'd probably start to look at that conversation with the leader and others about whether there's a need for an earlier update. So at the point we do such an update would be a chance to sort of fix that at root. In the meantime, we provide interactive dashboards to you as part of this. If you go into the Power BI dashboard, you can click by policy committee there, and it will always give you a cut of the metrics and tracking by policy committee, not just by business plan theme. So there is at least a workaround in the meantime for you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, the second question, I believe, was about when the life expectancy data will be released. Yeah, we get that from Public Health England, so I can go back and find out exactly when that will be released. But the data is it's still a metric within the new business plan, so that will continue to be reported.
Okay, any more questions or comments? Okay, thank you, members. So as I said at the beginning, this report is for information. So I'll ask the committee, Strategy and Resources Policy Committee, to note the theme summary reports and overall performance progress and the measures to address performance issues to be implemented by the relevant council services. Can I take that as noted by the committee? Thank you. We now move on to agenda item number 8. Agenda item number 8 is the Q1 24-25 Corporate Risk Report. Unfortunately, the officer that was going to be presenting this report for unforeseen circumstances is unable to join us. So Tony Kirkham, the Section 151 officer, is going to do a brief overview, but just to be aware that as a result, some of your questions may have to be responded to at a later date via email. My apologies for this inconvenience. Again, there are no decisions to be taken on this report. This is for information, but this report provides an update on current significant strategic risks to achieving the Council's objectives, as set in the Corporate Strategy 2022-2027, and summarises progress in managing those risks and actions being taken as at Q1 of 24-25. Tony.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this is a regular report in relation to the Council's identified corporate risks and the management action which is being taken. This report will follow on to all of the policy committees, where obviously there may be some more specific issues for councillors to review. However, there is one risk here which I would highlight, which sits more with this committee than other committees, which is CRR15, which is possible in-year financial deficit, which you will see is a deteriorating risk. Obviously, the evidence in relation to that deterioration is set out in another report later on the agenda in relation to the current projections for the Council's financial position. So obviously that is something which I'm happy to answer any questions on currently if required, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Any comments? Councillor Gillandris.
Thank you, Chair. Tony, you're absolutely right. That is... item 13 is shown as the big risk, as it were, and obviously I'm very interested in finance. And I know we are looking at it again, but I thought I'd raise it now. How worried should we be? Do you think the £12.5 million overrun, or whatever you want to call it, is that as bad as it gets, or is there a serious risk that it's going to get worse than that by the time we get to the year end?
Thank you, Chair. It is a forecast for the year based on the information that was available at the time, but the report does set out a number of risks which are still emerging and still being managed by the service departments. So it is possible that could deteriorate in future periods, but obviously if the management action starts to take starts to make an impact in that space, then there is a potential that it could come down. But at 12.5 million, obviously it is substantial. If you put it into the context of the council's general fund reserves, and it's a significant chunk of those which would have to be used if that was the final outturn position, and obviously that would need to be managed within the medium-term financial plan, and those reserves would need to be restored based on a risk-based approach. So this current report saying 12.5 million, there is potential for it to deteriorate, but over the financial year, as some of the management actions take hold, hopefully there is possibility for it also to reduce.
Councillor Mack.
The fact that the financial risk has deteriorated, so originally I assumed that was at the beginning of the quarter. It was determined unlikely that we would have a in-year financial deficit. We've had a number of challenging years. I guess there have been actions taken in those years, or in some cases, such as CAS, some unexpected income that has maybe helped us. I'm wondering whether it was ever really fair to say that it was unlikely that we were going to have. I'm maybe not asking a very fair question here, but I'm not sure if has something massively changed in the quarter, or is it just everything that was difficult has remained being difficult?
Chair, in response, some of the legacy issues which are coming out of last year's outturn position are continuing and are worsening as you look to see the detail. So the council did live within its planned resources, although there was a revision in year, and as you point out, additional income streams were identified to mitigate some of those risks. So when we reported the outturn, we were within resource. So on balance, with a new budget approved, with the due diligence which had been undertaken at that point, I think it's reasonable to say the council's plans were to live within its means, and they continue to be that. But current forecast, given the number of known issues and the size and quantity of those, is currently projecting a deficit. Obviously, management will continue to try and take action, but it is fair to say that it is going to be very difficult to sustain a position within our resources by the end of the current financial year.
Councillor Reynard.
So mine is a follow-up to those questions, and obviously P3 is coming to the next meeting, but I just wondered if at this point you had any insight into what the P3 position is likely to show. Is it going to show a further deterioration, the same improvement?
The fact that we're planning to bring you a P3, which is an exception report within the timelines, would suggest that currently we believe there is a further deterioration in the position. We are still reviewing those figures, and obviously we'll prepare a report, but it's fair to say some of the risks which were identified within the report later on the agenda are firming up, and some of the action to mitigate them. Obviously, the longer it takes for that to be delivered, the less mitigating impact. So it's fair to say the period 3 position is more likely to show a further deterioration.
Thank you. And I think when we move on to the next agenda item, I think we would clarify even further we are facing a very serious financial position, and I don't think that anybody in this chamber, elected members or officers alike, should be under any illusion about that. Do I have any more questions or comments? Councillor Malik.
Just the obvious on the connected risks and implications of and improving risks, and on the matrix, obviously pointing out to the obvious possible failure of safeguarding vulnerable children, being a critical level, also children placed in unregistered provision, and the failure of the HRA stock to meet landed standards, all in critical. I mean, what's the timeline, and what's the mitigation? I suppose I know it's all in the report, but just to state the obvious.
Chair, if I may, I'm not the expert in relation to the position in relation to those risks or the management action which is being taken. So I suggest we would respond through correspondence with Councillor Malik to set out the actions in that area.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Malik. Unfortunately, the individual concerned who might have been able to answer that report is unable to join us, but we will get a response to you. Do I have any more comments or questions? Councillor Whippington.
Just a very quick one, sorry, on the risk regarding cybersecurity, as Tim's in the room. I'm just wondering if we're ever likely to get that risk down below 20, or whether you think, you know, the nature of the problem and developing risk means it's always going to be sitting there at that 20 or above.
Sure, thank you. I stayed in the room just in case. I thought this might come up. So this actual risk is around the council's risk being higher than should be expected. So I think that there has to be a baked-in understanding that there is always a level of cyber risk and always will be. But this risk came from a time when we were probably disproportionately at risk compared to where you'd want to be as a council. We've been doing a lot of work in our digital transformation programme to improve that, much of which is in flight and due for completion this year or has been completed already. So the answer is yes, I do think you will see the risk improve. We're having a whole new council-wide network installed that will be configured in a different way and it is more secure. We've been turning on various security enhancements in existing suites, so biometric facial recognition, for example, on laptops has gone on recently. And we'll very, very shortly be at a position where we'll reach the National Cyber Security Centre's sort of better accreditation for security. So I do think you'll start to see the risk lower in many areas that have been problematic in the past. And indeed, in many cases, that's already been done. The issues I think we still have to contend with come from other parts of cybersecurity risk. We're just completed at the moment an independent assessment of that posture, and that's part of an update on the digital strategy that we hope to bring you in September at this committee. But for example, that will look at onward risk, so supplier risk is one of those. We've got a strategy now where we have a lot of our systems hosted by suppliers, where we say we need you to be this secure before we give you a contract, and we check that. But how well do we follow up? Do we see their independent audits? Do we review them every year and make sure that's still the case? What do we do about recovery? If one of those suppliers is hit with an attack, they do the right thing and switch off their system. That might protect us from a hacking point of view, but it still switches off a system we needed to use. So what do we do? So there's still those sort of other areas related to cyber where the maturity in the council is probably lower than it could be. And we're currently getting that sort of independent view of posture and the next set of work we need to do to improve. So I think you'll see this risk come down, but I think we've still got a journey to go on to fully understand and contain across the whole risk environment.
Okay, any more questions or comments on that? Okay, in that case, as I mentioned in the beginning, that report is for noting. So can I please ask the committee to note that report? Thank you. That brings us on to agenda item number 9, which is the council tax reduction scheme. This report provides an update on the council tax reduction scheme in Bristol. The report also sets out illustrative options of scheme costs based on scenarios of a 10%, a 15% and a 20% reduction in current entitlement levels. These options, if taken forward, would deliver an estimated gross saving to the council ranging from 2.9 million to 5.8 million per annum. Depending on the approach taken by the committee, this could ultimately be a key decision involving a significant impact on 2 or more wards in the city and savings greater than 500,000. Before I invite Graham Clatt and Matt Kender to introduce and outline the report, I believe the Interim Chief Executive wanted to comment.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words before my colleagues come in. I mean, I suppose the first thing to say is, conscious this is still the early days of the Strategy and Resources Committee, in a sense, in the big picture, you'll be concerned about how strategy and resources align. we need to make sure that our resources in the council are driven by strategy, and we also need to ensure that the strategy is affordable within the resources that we have. So I think that the combination of the two terms, the two words, will be a feature of your work through the whole of this 4-year period, and will inevitably mean some difficult decisions and some balancing and prioritisation of the strategy and the goals that you have within the resources available to the City Council. So moving specifically to the Council Tax Reduction Scheme, as a newcomer coming into the Council, it's clear that Bristol City Council has done a really noble job of shielding its low-income households from the burden of making a council tax contribution. And that's a tremendous tribute and achievement, I think, for the city, that it's been able to do this for so long. But I think the paper shows quite conclusively that Bristol has become a significant outlier in its council tax reduction scheme. And I want to say as clearly as I can to you that I think the reason that we're an outlier is that all comparable councils that we can identify are ahead of us in finding that reform to the scheme is necessary. And that the reason that they will have reached that conclusion, which I think is the same reason that it's inevitable that Bristol City Council will reach the same conclusion unless there's some kind of intervention which I can't currently predict, is that the scheme is unaffordable. So just in terms of the net proportion of the budget that this agenda item consumes, I think it's approximately 10% of the complete net budget of the council represented by the council tax reduction scheme. It's probably, I'm looking at the Director of Finance here, the single biggest spending area that the committee will be dealing with. So it's right that you consider it carefully. And as I say, I think without reform, the risk is that at some point when change is necessary, that the poorest in the community could experience a cliff edge from the level of support that is currently provided to a much lower level of support. So I think just in summary, before my colleagues come in with some detail, the council faces many difficult decisions, as you've indicated, Chair, in the months and years ahead. And it's incumbent on, I think, on officers to be as clear and straightforward as we can be about our spending plight. I think that we must change. The timing and manner of the change is a matter for this committee. And I think that we can change while still remaining true to the principles of equity and fairness, which I know are so important in Bristol.
Graham.
Thank you, Paul. Chair. So to start with, Graham Clapp, Head of Revenues and Benefits. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on the council tax reduction scheme in Bristol and to provide, as was mentioned earlier, illustrative options on the scheme costs. So just a little bit of background. Since council tax benefit was abolished by the coalition government back in 2013, local authorities in England are responsible for designing their own CTR scheme for those of working age. Pensioners are protected in a scheme that is prescribed by central government. Despite reduced funding being made available to local authorities, Bristol remains one of the very small number of local authorities to have kept its level of support up to pre-2013 levels. And this can be up to 100% of council tax liability for a household. And what that means is, at present, nearly 3/4 of working age households entitled to council tax reduction have their council tax liability met in full. As has been said before, reduced funding by central government, alongside a decoupling from housing benefit, which is also administered by my team, has resulted in substantially unfunded CTR schemes. There is the possibility, of course, that the newly elected government might choose to review the current approach, which places the burden of alleviating vulnerable households on financially stressed local authorities. And this appears to be the only scenario in which a current scheme is sustainable. However, as Paul's alluded to, if this change is not forthcoming over the coming year, it seems inevitable that Council will need to review the scheme with a potential abrupt negative impact on low-income households. Most local authorities choose council tax reduction schemes that provide less support than the scheme that they were replacing, with some low-income households having to pay council tax for the first time and others seeing their tax liabilities increase. Over 90% of English councils and all other core cities have made changes to their CTR scheme for working age households, with almost all of them reducing support. The most common approach in those authorities is a minimum payment of around 20%. And there's a summary of core schemes in Appendix 3, which we can go through if there are any questions. As some of you will be aware, it was agreed by the previous administration in December that the current scheme would remain for 24-25. To come on to the scheme cost, the CTR scheme as of May 2024 costs £44.5 million, of which the working age scheme is £30.4 million. Pension age scheme, the rest, 14.1. The cost borne by the council is around 85% of this, with 15% borne by the precepting authorities. So that's the Fire Authority and the Avon and Somerset Police and Crime Commissioner. With regard to the caseload, recent trends suggest that the caseload is reducing slowly and is approximately 2% lower than it was a year ago. This would see a fall in expenditure of the scheme if council tax was not increased for 24-25. However, planning assumptions are that in line with previous years, we would expect it to be increased, potentially, as it has been in previous years, by up to 4.99%. And that, of course, would see an uplift in the cost of the scheme. So just very briefly to outline what those costs would be, with a static caseload for 25-26, the total scheme would cost us £46.9 million, 32.1 million of which is for working age, 14.8 for pension age. With the current trend, it would be £45.9 million, and an increase would see us spending 48.1 million, and a 2.5% decrease would see us spending just under 46 million. Councils are required to review their council tax reduction scheme each year and decide whether to replace it with another scheme or keep as is. This is detailed in paragraph 5, section 1A of the Local Government's Finance Act. Just to come on to the consultation, Bristol has reviewed its scheme 3 times since it was introduced in 2013. So that was in the first year, in 2017, and again last year, when in the end we made a decision not to make any changes. But it is important to mention that when we went for the consultation last year, just under 60% of Bristol's respondents said that they wanted some change. I think it's also fair to say that the scheme consultation that we put up last year contained a myriad of other options. So it wasn't the case that there was definitely one clear favoured option, but it is the case that just under 60% of Bristol citizens, including those on council tax reduction themselves, said that they favoured people making a contribution. Just to give a very brief outline on any consultation should we need to do so, that would need to take place in the late summer, early autumn of this year, which in order to meet the deadline of full council in January 2025. So obviously if that was to be the case, timelines are pretty tight. You've mentioned already the savings, so just to outline that the savings were based on a 10%, a 15% and a 20% contribution, and those would range from a saving of 2.9 million to 5.8 million, and that would mean approximately, we would be asking citizens to contribute somewhere between £162 a year for the 10% and £322 for the 20%. Obviously, we've tried to work out the collection rate based on this possibility, because we wouldn't expect 100% collection rate, so we've got figures for both a 65% and a 75% collection rate. It's also worth pointing out that if we do decide to change the scheme, there are a significant number of variations and models that are carried out throughout the country, from flat amount that you pay to a banded scheme. And obviously, if that's the decision we choose to make in time, we will be prepared to supply all the information on those. I think that's it. That's it from me. Unless there are any questions, I'm sure there are.
Okay, thank you, Graham. So, for the benefit of the committee, and just to ensure everybody understands where we are going to, I'm going to allow you opportunity to ask questions and make comments. We are then I am then going to propose the original motion and ask for a seconder. However, as you will be aware, there's also an amendment to come to this as well, so we will then discuss and vote on the amendment as well. So first thing first, though, is does anybody have any questions in general? Councillor Gooch.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of the council tax reduction scheme being a cost to the council for a start. This is public money that we take as a tax from people. And we're talking about the council tax reduction system is just taking less tax from them. It's not a cost to us. It's less of a money grab by us from them. And yeah, I'd like to know if there is any information about how much it would cost to try and pursue taking money from the people who don't have it and can't afford it, who then would fall into a deficit with their council tax, and then end up having to be pursued through credit collection agencies, etc. There will be a cost to that, which you may never get back. So has that actually been looked into as to how much it would cost to pursue non-payers? Because I would think that asking people to pay money they don't have is a non-starter.
Just a couple of points. Firstly, I mean, the reality of the situation is we're not going to get 100% payment. We know that, and we will reach a situation with some people where we'll write it off, as happens now. I'd sort of turn that question round the other way and just say, from my point of view, it is the case that every other core city expects people to make some sort of contribution. So we would be the outlier if we don't, and we continue to be the outlier if we don't. So I accept the points that you're making, but it is the case that every other core city expects people to make a contribution, and every city that's gone down this route, every core city has overcome the hurdle at the start of people having to make some form of contribution. That being said, you know, there would be a point at which we do not pursue recovery any further because there is no economic value in doing so.
Councillor Rippington.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Graham, I sat on the Task and Finish group last year that looked into this, along with several other members here. The unanimous opinion of that group at the end of looking at all the statistics, all the ways that money could be collected, all the hidden costs of collecting this money off people, the burden on other departments, and that was that we should not proceed with changes to the system. I'm just wondering what is different in this report from the report that you presented to us last year. Thanks.
Well, I mean, my first comment would be that I think the thing that's different is the financial situation of the council. So from my perspective, we're in a situation whereby, you know, we have to look at absolutely everything everywhere to see what we can do. And I would also come back to the point that was in the report that when we went out to consultation, more people in the city said that they felt people should make a contribution than should not. I mean, bottom line is, I'm an officer who will make a recommendation. Politicians will make a decision, and that's how the system works. But you know, as the Chief Exec has said at the very start of this, with the situation we're in financially, and with the amount of money that this is as a percentage of our budget, it's highlighting where we are and where we think we could get some of that money.
But effectively, it's the same recommendations that came forward last year? Yeah.
To be frank, last year, I think, yes, we did. We reached a situation, didn't we, whereby in December it was going to go forward, and then it wasn't the case, yeah.
Chair, just to add to that, I guess what's different to this time last year is that the council's financial position has since this time last year and continues to deteriorate. And the council is living beyond its means, and so gradually every month its position is less sustainable than it was the month before. So in that sense, something real and important has changed in the context in which decisions are taken.
Thank you. Do I have any more comments or questions?
Just one other comment. Or one question. There is a statutory element to this, which is people of non-working age, which we have to provide. Do we receive any funding for that element? I don't believe we do, but we have to continue to provide that anyway.
So the answer is yes and no. So yes, we do have to continue, and no, we don't receive any funding.
Okay, any more questions or comments? Okay, so what I'm going to do is now move the report recommendations and ask for a seconder. Once that is done, I'll ask for the amendment to be moved and for a seconder for that, and then we'll discuss the amendment. So the motion, the proposer is that the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee, 1, notes the content of this report and its financial implication, and 2, agrees an approach on Bristol's 2025-2026 council tax reduction scheme. Do I have a seconder?
Seconded.
However, I understand there is an amendment. Councillor Mack?
Yeah, hopefully you've all read the amendments since Friday. The report talks about agreeing an approach. I think this is my attempt to have some approach, some next steps. And you know, we've just heard the severity of the situation from the officers, but also acknowledging we have a new government and this hope that things might change, that we do need support for, this is basically a welfare move, and we do need support from the government for that. I find it very hard to say the situation that we're in, where, you know, it does look like we would really struggle. This is a warning. This is, I guess, a line in the sand of how would we afford this next year after, you know, I've spent years, and last year especially, fighting for the protection of the council tax reduction scheme, but being very honest about our finances. And yeah, I think just making sure that this amendment makes the report very clear of the situation we're in and what it's looking like for the future. I was very much part of all of the discussions about and the consultation process last year, and we can talk about the 10 or 20%. I think for me, putting that in real figures, so some people, I remember it might have been about £7 a week, which for the very lowest payment might be £7 a week, but that might be £7 a week for someone who has a total income of £70 a week. Those were the sorts of figures we were looking at. And when you think of it like that, you're like, well, how would you find the £7 if the money that you have coming in is £70 a week? And I think for me, even that 10% figure feels absolutely unaffordable for some. So yeah, the attempt to just explain why we are trying to save this for as long as we can, but also putting some points about our actions going forward. So a lot of it is about making representations to the government.
Okay, can I ask for a seconder for the motion, and then we'll go to debate.
I had something else I wanted to add as well, which was that as well as writing to the Deputy Prime Minister, Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, that we also write to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury as well. So if you could note that would be useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. I've just been informed that you can't actually second the amendment because you seconded the original motion. So can I ask for another seconder for the motion?
I'm happy to second.
Okay, thank you. Can we now go to debate? Do I have any? Councillor Ribbington.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, a point of order about the amendment. The report says officer recommendations, but these are clearly not officer recommendations. They are our political judgment as a committee. So how does that work within this report?
That's a very good question, but my understanding is we can amend the officer's recommendations as politicians, that we are the decision makers in this committee. So we are able to put in amendments of our own to the officer's recommendations and then vote on those recommendations. And once we have voted and approved them, they then become the officer's recommendations as well. Do I have any more comments?
Thanks for that clarity. I've got a comment as well. We're broadly supportive of what it says here, but we do think that there is some wording that we would prefer to be removed, because in section C, for instance, it says recognises that without a change in national policy, the current scheme is unlikely to be feasible from that time. We would ask that line is removed so that it merely says continues to fund the existing council tax reduction scheme at its current level for one more year in 2025-26. That's a firm recommendation then. And also in D, we feel that this paragraph is basically making assumptions about facts that we don't yet know to be true, because we don't know what the local government settlement will be in the future, and therefore we're preempting the idea that we're not going to be able to afford the council tax reduction scheme going forward. So we would ask that be removed, and we would then be happy to support the rest of the wording. We do feel that wording also is, having, as a Labour group, having supported the council tax reduction scheme and maintained it through 8 years of austerity, it does feel that we're kind of giving up at the first hurdle now that we're past that system. So from a political point of view, that's a comment, but we would, if people were happy to remove that wording, we'd be happy to support this.
Okay, just one comment I would make, however, is, and I did say this right at the beginning, that when we make changes to any recommendations, we have to be very clear about what we are changing, which is why I would expect in most cases that if you are making amendments, that you would provide them in writing beforehand, so we can be fully and absolutely accurate about what is being proposed. Do you have a written version of what you've just proposed?
So if
yes.
I could come in, to be fair, we received this Friday, and then the revised version, 2 hours before the meeting. I think what's being suggested is clear, delete from but in C and delete D. So, we appreciate we're all learning around how to deal with amendments. We're not looking to criticise that, but I think just to be fair to us, yeah.
Okay, point taken, Tom. Particularly as we criticised you for the motion on amendment for council. So, does anybody have any objection to those changes? As nobody else, Councillor Stafford Townsend.
Can you just make sure, just for clarity, we get the full changed amendment maybe read out, just so we know exactly what we're agreeing to?
Okay, well, what items are being changed? Let me read out the one. You just tell me the lettered ones. So is A being changed?
No.
Is B being changed?
No.
Is C being changed?
Yes, from but, delete.
So read out what the changed version would be.
So keep the first part. So continues to fund the existing council tax reduction scheme at its current level for one more year in 2025-26, and then put a full stop.
D.
Delete in its entirety.
And E.
No change.
Okay, is everybody satisfied they understand what that amendment is? Okay, in that case, can we go to a vote? Councillor Mack.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on D. I would say that we have heard, D reiterates what we have heard from officers about the affordability of the scheme. I think we can't change the fact that we have heard that, whether how much we think that might change over the next year. I am happy to cut it if that's important, but I think that I would just say the report states that anyway, and we have heard that it is difficult to afford. Whether or not we note it in this point, it is a thing that we have heard in the rest of the report. So in a sense, I think it doesn't make that much difference to cut it from there, but we can't strike it from the record that we have heard that it is that it is unique that we have this scheme and difficult to afford.
Councillor Renard.
I can just briefly respond. I think the point is we don't know what the local government finance settlement is going to be. We don't know what will and won't come in different areas as well. And you know, in previous years, there's been targeted funding for things like adult social care because you're already presuming there'll be cuts to services that are unidentified at this point. So it's not. It feels not factually accurate to say that at the moment because we obviously don't know what the funding settlement is.
Councillor King.
I'll just add to that we haven't all heard about what these predicted steeper reduction in service levels are going to be, or I haven't heard that in the public meetings yet. So I don't know if there's been the transparency over that you guys have had access to that we haven't, but we're not really sure yet what you're referencing. So it's quite hard for us to make a decision on that basis as well.
Just for clarity, apart from myself, you have all had access to the same information. Councillor Goots, and then I'm going to move to a vote.
Okay, there's just one thing that is possible, obviously, is council tax itself is a very unfair system, and we as a party would like to move to a different system itself. So it is always possible that the entire system might change, and we should obviously have room for that change to be happening in this.
I think what I was saying in response to that is if council tax is abolished, then this entire thing falls anyway. And hopefully we will have a scheme that is much more progressive and enables people to actually be able to pay and contribute to the council's finances without being penalised for their state of poverty. What I'm going to do now is, if everybody's agreed with the amended version of this, can I ask for all those who are in favour to raise their hands? The amended amendment. Okay, thank you. That's unanimous. So on that basis, we then move to the amended recommendations. So can I ask if everybody is in favour of those or have any comments on the amended, which is basically what we've just done, plus the original item number 1. Is everybody in favour? Okay. That's unanimous as well. Thank you all very much. We now move on to agenda item number 10. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Matt. Agenda item number 10 is Bristol Temple Quarter acquisitions. I'm assuming this is going to be Abigail. So, Abigail, let me just quickly find my page, because I too am trying to be very careful about making sure I say exactly the right thing. So this report proposes approving an option agreement in place at Redcliffe Way in favour of the Bristol Temple Quarter Limited Liability Partnership, arrangements for the acquisition of the lower station approach site from Railpen, an arrangement to acquire leaseholder interest within Temple Quarter where the council hold the reversionary freehold. This will be a key decision as it involves spend of over 500,000. I now invite Abigail Stratford to introduce and outline the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dyer. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Abigail Stratford. I'm the Head of Regeneration here at Bristol. And as you've just outlined, the purpose of the report is to seek delegated authority to progress a number of strategic acquisitions within the Temple Quarter regeneration area. Temple Quarter is one of the largest regeneration projects in the UK. The programme aims to deliver up to 10,000 new homes, thousands of new jobs and improved sustainable infrastructure, public spaces across 130 hectares of land in central Bristol. In March this year, the Temple Quarter Limited Liability Partnership was formed with the objective of delivering the regeneration of Temple Quarter. As part of the agreement, all the partners within the LLP have agreed to pool their land interests to enable the comprehensive regeneration of the area to take place. And today we're seeking a number of approvals to enable the council to take proactive action to assemble land within the area. The first approval is for us to negotiate with Homes England to try and defer or transfer a historic grant repayment which we have to them associated with Hengrove Park Phase 1 infrastructure, and the date of that agreement was February 2010. And subject to officers securing agreement with Homes England to either defer or transfer that grant repayment, we would like approval from yourselves to use those funds to acquire Lower Station Approach, which is a strategically important site within Temple Quarter from Railpen. If that site is acquired successfully, our intention is to put an option on the land in favour of the Temple Quarter LLP so that the site can be included in the forthcoming procurement exercise, which will seek to secure a private sector partner to work with the LLP to deliver the regeneration of Temple Quarter. In addition, we're seeking approval to put an option on the site at Redcliffe Way in favour of the LLP, and we're also seeking approval to acquire in the future sites where long leasehold interests on sites where we own the reversionary freehold, subject to those costs for the acquisition being met by one of the Temple Quarter partners, notably Homes England or the Combined Authority.
Okay, thank you, Abigail. Do I have any questions or comments? Councillor Wennard, Councillor Stafford Townsend. Councillor Wennard first.
Hello. Most of this I'm fine with, but I think we just probably want to expand on Redcliffe Way because this was a Gorham Homes site that was in their pipeline, and they'd gone through quite a lengthy process to co-design, do a design competition with local residents, the local cathedral and a representative from there. And I know there's been quite a lot of upset and disappointment over the decision to then now transfer this into Temple Court, which also could actually delay a site that could otherwise potentially come forward quicker, because I think the procurement of the wider kind of development partner is going to be next year now. Is that, if I've understood things correctly? So there's that. I'm obviously aware, to preempt what I know is going to come, that yes, they couldn't find an investment partner, but obviously they were pre-planning at that stage. One of the things that changes around trying to secure investment is, of course, once you've succeeded in achieving planning. So I'd just like to unpick that a bit, because I am quite concerned that we could be delaying something coming forward by doing this. On balance, I recognise there's the potential that it makes the wider opportunity more viable when you're going out to procure, and I've sort of really been weighing those things up, and from discussions I've had previously and seeing this here, because I think if we've got an opportunity to bring it forward through Gorham Homes, then why would we not continue to do that, given the amount of work and also resource that has gone into that process today?
Yeah, so as you alluded to, the site was previously in the Gorham Homes pipeline. They worked with the community to develop a scheme. They went to the market to procure a partner, and they were unable to successfully find a private sector partner to deliver the scheme that they had developed. We've had conversations with the local community representatives, and including the cathedral, to update them on the changes in the proposal, and we have assured them that they will still be actively involved as the scheme progresses. The procurement process for Temple Quarter is due to commence in the autumn, and it's anticipated that it will take a 12-month process. As part of that, we're starting to think about what we do through the procurement process to accelerate delivery once we get a partner on board. So it may be that we can think about how we can incorporate Redcliffe Way into that. So, and I think that the importance of the site to Temple Quarter from a placemaking perspective is really important, to be able to have the kind of impact that we want to create a high quality place, the relationship of that site to the Brunel Mile is really, through the master planning process, has been identified as really important. And I guess finally to say that Gorham Homes have been fully compensated for the costs and the time that they've incurred to date on the project from the LLP. So, and Gorham, conversations with Gorham, we believe that they're comfortable and happy, comfortable with that approach. So they have been fully compensated for both their time and the costs that they've spent on the project to date.
Thank you for confirming, particularly in terms of the financial aspects. Also, we don't want our council-owned housing company to be doing a load of work that they've got to abort. Just a follow-up, I mean, what's going to happen with all that work that was done around the co-design? Is that going to attempted to be still incorporated to potentially move forward, or is it going to go completely back to the drawing board if it goes into the vehicle?
Yeah, so we've got all of that information and we will share that through the procurement process with the partner, and we hope that we can build and grow on that and doing further work with the community and the cathedral as part of the wider transformation as Temple Quarter. So absolutely it will be grown and expanded on. But we will do that in partnership with the private sector partner, both through the procurement and once they're appointed.
One last one, Tom.
One final question. So there's an advisory group, wasn't there, that sat around the Redcliffe Way site? Is that continuing?
I believe so. It was up to, I'm not directly involved in that group, but my understanding is that that is planned to continue.
With those assurances?
But I can clarify that. I can pick up with the representatives of the group and clarify that.
That'd be really helpful. So with those assurances, I'm comfortable for this to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stafford Townsend.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Tom for stealing quite a lot of my questions just then, because I was going to ask the same, because he's looking very smug, because it's in my ward, and I know we've spoken about this before, so it's good to have reassurances as best as we can for the community that's worked very hard on that particular project. And I know you've said that you'll keep myself and my ward colleague in the loop about that as it kind of progresses as well. I've got another question related to that. I've been meeting recently with the Redcliffe Nursery, which is a maintained nursery, and I know that they've had some discussions with the Temple Quarter development, and I think possibly yourself or some of the officers, about taking on a nursery site within Temple Quarter. There's clearly a need. The 2001 census has about 2,000 children under the age of 4, so nursery age in 21, with that the different age brackets being a consistent but slightly growing year on year in that age range. So it's definitely going to be a need, especially as we grow the city centre population. But one of the problems with the spaces that have been offered is that there's no outside space, and as most of these children are likely to come from flats which don't have any outside space at home, it is crucial for nursery children's educational and their well-being for them to have outside space. So looking for reassurances that we can not only ensure that there is proper community provision within Temple Quarter as it gets brought forward as a development, but that it's adequate and suitable provision, and that especially includes nursery provision.
Yeah, I think we need to take that away and work with you on that offline. So obviously there is an aspiration, and through the master plan we'll identify suitable locations and we'll make sure that the required community and social infrastructure is delivered. But I think that's a point, you raise a really important point. It's absolutely essential that children have access to outside space. So I think if it's okay, we'll take that offline with you and maybe meet with the nursery and understand their requirements, and then think about how we can work with them to help meet those needs. Because it's quite a specific point, but it's a really important point, and we'd love to work with you on that.
Thank you, especially seeing as the children that attend Redcliffe Nursery are amongst our most deprived in the city as well. And other additional questions related to that is not only the social housing provision that would be included in the development, but the family-sized affordable and social provision that we require in the city centre, because one of the things that I've also found by looking at the census data and the other ward profile data that we produce as a council is the way in which, because we're not creating and building family provision in the city centre, our most deprived families, in order to not over-occupy and to get a home that fits their needs, are having to move outwards in the city and move to places where there's less economic opportunity and and away from their own communities as well, and their bonds that they've created where they live. So also seeking reassurances that we will have family social housing provision within the Temple Quarter development.
So the Temple Quarter LLP are currently in the process of developing a master plan for the area, and they're thinking about where the homes will be and what type of homes they'll be. Obviously, as they go through a procurement process, they'll get a partner on board, and at that point, they'll start to bring forward individual schemes, and they'll look at the right mix. So I think that's something we need to continue to talk to you on and work as the master plan develops and as the procurement process develops, and we can bring back here to give you an update on that position. But completely understand the importance of having larger, affordable family homes in the centre.
Thank you. It's the one thing our residents are repeatedly asking for.
Yeah,
thank you.
And that covers across city centre and Froomgate and a number of the other central areas of growth and regen that we're working across. It's a consistent theme. Yeah. And
it is possible because so the cargo development behind Wapping Wharf and the M Shed have, as a result of conversations with myself and Tom, were also both involved in that. That development does have now affordable family provision within it, which is amazing, and they've got outside space as part of it as well. So it's demonstrated it's possible within the city centre, and we need more of that for a sustainable city centre.
Yeah, it's a fantastic precedent and something that we definitely aspire to do within Temple Quarter and the other areas of growth and regen in the centre. But I think, yeah, it's something that we're just at the beginning of that journey, so we need to keep talking to you about that and bringing that back here to update you on that position.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rippington.
Yeah, thanks. Just wondering if, expanding this slightly, whether you could let us know what progress is being made on an affordable housing strategy for Temple Quarter.
Yeah, so that's currently being worked through in partnership with Homes England, and Helen Bone and Louise Davidson within the housing delivery team are working collaboratively with the Temple Quarter LLP and Homes England and to develop that. So that's currently in development. There was a workshop, I think, last week on that. So again, that's something we happily share with you once we've got a final working draft.
Sorry, I had two hands ago up there. Councillor Goots and then Councillor King.
Hi, I was just wondering what the, because you mentioned thousands of new jobs, and I was just wondering what the mix would be between, say, office space and housing, and are we looking at how much kind of office space we're providing in the city, given that there's less, there's a lot more people working from home these days, and is there a reduction in need for office space? Can we increase housing space as a result, or is this something that has been all sort of worked out and looked at?
Yeah, so that's something that's currently being worked through the development of the master plan, and they're currently actively looking at a range of different scenarios informed by market intelligence. So again, that's something that's currently work in progress, and again, we can update you on in due course. I think it's really important to add that the evidence for the office market in that area is still very strong at the moment. And so the scenarios that are being developed and tested through the master plan are very much informed by current and future predictions on both the office and housing markets. They're evidence-led scenarios that are being tested.
I mean, just listening to your question, if I could come in, Chair, thank you, Councillor Gucci's question. In London, and it's probably similar in Bristol, I should think, there is very significant demand for what's seen as attractive and new office development, which is attractive to companies and to their employees and is seen as fit for purpose in the current era. So that market is very vibrant and lively, whereas the market for less attractive, old-fashioned office buildings is very low or maybe even non-existent. So it's quite hard to characterise it as a whole. In part, I think, as I understand it, it's probably true in Bristol as well, Abby, in part the market for new offices is exceptionally lively, and in part it's very low. The risk probably for Bristol is that if we didn't have sufficiently new, attractive office space, we might lose that to other places. Companies are less likely to compromise on what they would see as lower quality office estate.
Okay, thank you. Ellie.
Thank you. I just wanted to reference, in regards to sort of childcare provision, we had a motion that was brought through maybe April of this year in full council that was passed, which asked officers to explore the potential for a strategic SIL as a capital cost for new childcare nursery facilities. So I'm just hoping that that could be explored, or if it has been explored as a way to possibly meet the cost of that provision. And also, I just wanted to highlight as well the Parks and Green Space strategy that came through Council, through Cabinet earlier this year, which really did reiterate the need to drive out green space in those opportunities that we have got a limited amount of in the centre, such as Temple Quarter, such as St Philip's Marsh and the Froome Gateway as well, and that being one of very few opportunities to do that. And I know that there's a lot of support for that as well. So I'm really hoping that that will be pursued with vigour by officers. Thanks.
Yeah, we obviously, the master plan is currently being developed by the LLP, and we're collaborating with colleagues in Parks, and they're informing that work, and again options are being looked at. I'd also reference the Mead Street Development Framework, which seeks to secure a reasonably significant provision of new green open space to support the growth that's planned there, but also the adjoining kind of White House Street. So yeah, that's all being thought about, and again we can bring updates back on the green space provision within the master plan in due course. The SIL point hadn't reached me around the nurseries, but I'll take that away and we can speak to colleagues about how we can consider that moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Malik.
Just an observation, Chair. It seems that there does seem to be some high demand for a briefing or something with regards to Bristol Temple Quarter. All members have questions that are probably off the topic of the report. I just want to say that there is a large BME community in Lawrence Hill. The one I've spoken to over several occasions have always been worried about the consultation and their involvement in the kind of case for affordable housing. So I think it was important to mention that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you. And we're happy to arrange a more detailed briefing for this committee and specifically on Temple Quarter. I think it's really important you understand the role and the function of the company, and maybe take you on a site tour as well. So I can liaise with the office at the chair and with you all and get that in the diary.
Thank you. I also think as we start to ramp up the Temple Quarter area, there are going to be quite a few more briefings that are going to be made available, and quite a few more decisions that are going to come to various committees. Okay, I'm now going to move on to clarify for the committee what this report about. It's because it's a key decision, it does need to be put to the vote, so I'm going to very carefully read out what the recommendations are. The recommendation is that the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee agree to authorise the Executive Director of Growth and Regeneration, in consultation with the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee, the Section 151 Officer and Director of Legal Services, to take all steps required. 1, to seek and enter into agreement with Homes England to either defer or transfer the repayment obligation under the provision of the Engrove Park Phase 1 Infrastructure Grant Funding Agreement, dated the 23rd of February 2010, to the BTQ Bristol Temple Quarter Limited Liability Partnership. 2, subject to reach an agreement with Homes England to defer or transfer the repayment liability, to utilise allocated clawback provision to require lower station approach, including enter into any necessary legal agreements. 3, to agree the terms for and thereafter conclude and enter into an option agreement with the Bristol Temple Quarter Limited Liability Partnership, subject to satisfaction of the best consideration tests being met under Section 123, Section 1, Local Government Act 1972. 4. To agree the terms for and thereafter conclude and enter into option agreements and associated documentation with the Bristol Temple Quarter Limited Liability Partnership for Wetcliffe Way, as identified at Appendix A1, subject to satisfaction of the best consideration test being met under Section 123, Subsection 1, Local Government Act 1972. And 5, to reach and enter into agreement to acquire leaseholder interest within Temple Quarter, where Bristol City Council hold the reversionary freehold, subject to the cost being met by either Ohms England, Combined Authority, Bristol Temple Quarter Limited Liability Partnership, or its appointed development partner. I therefore move the report recommendations. Can I ask for a seconder?
Seconded.
Thank you. Can I therefore ask for all those in favour to raise their hands? That's unanimous decision. So the vote passes, and we now move on to the final agenda item, which is agenda item number 11, which we have inferred to several times already, and that's the Q1 P2 Finance Outturn report for 2024-2025. And I hand over to you now, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. As you'll see from the papers, there are a number of elements across the Council's finances which are overheating within year. That overheating continues from the Outturn position which we reported to you last time. But Section 2 sets out the sort of key headlines piece there in relation to the general fund. So what we have as a forecast for the current year, based upon the first two periods of financial accounting, is that the service areas are projecting, after taking into account various management actions, an overspend of 28.7 million. Now, there is 16.2 million across the corporate items, which we can apply legitimately to those pressures, such as the savings delivery elements and inflation, which would bring us to a forecast position of 12.5 million. Within that figure is the general fund savings position. You at Council approved a further £34 million worth of savings in the current budget. However, we also have legacy savings of 11.3 million from the previous year's on delivery. So in total, there are £46.8 million worth of savings across the various different activities, which we were planning to deliver in year. 32.6 million of that are currently on track. So again, a further legacy issue potentially of 14.2 million feeding into the future year. In addition to those items which are included in those forecasts, there are a further 16.6 million net risks which have been identified as part of the budget process. And as we said earlier, we will be bringing you a further report as some of those risks potentially materialise, or our forecast suggests that they are more likely than they previously were. And again, that will force further pressure into the Council's financial system and the general fund. Housing revenue account, there is a number of elements in there which are currently, again, overheating, some of that particularly around the Council's repair and maintenance requirements, and I know they've been discussed in other forum. Dedicated schools grant, although this is treated separately from the general fund under the current dispensations from the government, so any deficit on this account doesn't have to be applied against the council's reserves currently. Should that regulation change, and it's currently in place for this financial year and next financial year, then it would be a draw upon the council's reserves. As you can see, although there is continued pressure in that space, because of the safety valve arrangement, there is mitigation which is actually bringing that level down. Public health is on track, and the capital programme is in a situation where a very optimistic capital programme, which was developed as part of the council's budget process, is now being revised quite significantly, particularly in relation to the housing revenue account. But again, part of that is about the council ensuring that we have sufficient resource to maintain the 26,000 current council houses, rather than the ambitious development of the housing stock moving forward and increasing those. So at this point in time, it's fair to say the council has got some significant financial challenges. They are predominantly in the service areas, the social care, the temporary accommodation, areas which are familiar to councillors as part of the Outturn process. So they have been around for a while. We're still working from a management point of view in relation to solutions to mitigate and manage those. But as we currently sit here today, we anticipate that only a proportion of them will be managed, and therefore there would be a call upon the council's general reserves at the end of the financial year, which, as we said earlier, would need to be replaced as part of a medium-term financial plan, as they are risk-based and they are relatively low compared to other councils. Happy to answer questions, Chair.
Thanks, Tony. And just to reiterate that we are not playing games when we say we are in a serious financial position. And I cannot reiterate how serious this is. So I'll now hand over for questions or comments. Councillor Reynard.
Just one comment / question at this stage. It's something I've raised before, because what I noticed with the capital programme in terms of recommendations is to then reprofile, and which is fine, because I think there's a lot of things it's quite clear why it needs to be reprofiled, particularly in the housing. It's quite detailed, scheme by scheme, and I thank the officers for the clarity of that detail. One thing I just want to pull out was the accelerated acquisitions programme, and what was meant by reprofiling to the back end. Because obviously the acquisition programme is there to buy at properties, ex-right, to buy properties, potentially some that are in our leasehold at the moment, or other street properties that might be suitable within the set of guidelines that were signed off earlier this calendar year. And that, as well as obviously then bringing in rent to the HRA, also then potentially helps to alleviate our temporary accommodation challenges. So I'd just really like to understand why that's being reprofiled to the back end. Is it because of the time it's going to take to mobilise the procurement of the provider for that bigger programme? I just really understand that, because I just think that's like quite a key lever that we can pull to help reduce some of the pressure on the budgets, I think, particularly in relation to temporary accommodation, which I think is talked about as quite a significant pressure within the Growth and Regeneration Directorate.
Chair, obviously the detail is with G&R department, but obviously we will look at opportunities as and when they arise, and the business case for each of those individually we would consider. And if there is a positive position in relation to the council's overall position, then we would look to pursue those. However, as I said earlier, it is one of those areas of flexibility which we have, and while we're working through the needs in relation to the existing stock, I think the profile of that would be pushed to the back end. But obviously on a case-by-case basis, particularly where we've got the pressures in relation to a temporary accommodation, we are looking at housing options and purchase of housing options in that space to meet those particular needs.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's just, as long as we don't take the opportunity away by reprofiling, I guess is my point, as long as we don't then lose that ability to, if we do have that opportunity to bring it forward. I think I was reading about, is it Islington, who I think have since last October have brought back over 150 homes. So they've clearly managed to achieve some scale, because I think the target for this year was 150 homes here. So it'd just be interesting perhaps to look also at what they're doing. So just don't want to miss that opportunity or lose that opportunity as well, because obviously the amount of stock we hold, whether it's existing stock that is or isn't bought under right to buy, or new stock, also affects the overall revenue position and the money that can therefore also be invested back into the housing stock that's significantly ageing.
I think I'd just respond to that as well, because I think one of the advantages of leaving the reprofiling until the end, it gives us the advantage to respond quickly if that opportunity does arrive, and hopefully it will. Whereas if we started the reprofiling too soon, as you say, we will lose that. No, there'd be the opportunity cost. Councillor Whippington.
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to clarify my understanding on this. Obviously, inflation has dropped quite significantly this year, and we presumably built in some contingency for inflation when we did the budget, because that was a long time ago and nobody could forecast where we were now. Am I right in saying that is taken into account now in terms of the forecast here, and that we're already saying that we're saving money by not paying the amount of inflated costs that we thought we would?
Thank you, Chair. Some of the inflation elements which we'd estimated at the start of the financial year, we believe can be released to the departments now. So as part of that 16.6 million, that an element of that is the inflation provision, which we think is above and beyond what we would have other anticipated.
And if I could ask, a second one, which probably directed at our chief exec, if that's right. We're forecast to underspend by 149 million on our capital programme this year, which will give us £15 million back, which I believe is the servicing of the debt costs on that. Is that right? Would that be right? Sorry, Tony, I'll ask you that, and then I'll ask the... Yeah.
Yeah, probably a bit fair if you ask me that one. The vast majority of the capital underspend piece is in the housing revenue account, so the benefit of that is within the housing revenue account. But you'll also see, as part of the 16.6 million which we're releasing corporately, there's £1 million there in relation to the treasury management activity. So part of that's about the general fund borrowing, but also part of that's about the interest rate. So similar to your previous point about inflation, obviously interest rates are starting to, within the longer term market, starting to fall. I know that the Bank of England actually hasn't reduced the base rate yet, but in relation to the borrowing rates going forward, they are starting to reduce from some of the levels we'd anticipated. So there is incorporated there a benefit of that.
Okay. The point I was going to make is that every year we underspend on our capital, and we end up getting a bit back into the general fund in terms of not paying out on that. And I'm just, we go through the same cycle every year of over forecasting on how much we're going to spend, but also that has an impact on how much we need to save in our budget, and then a bit later on down the line we get it back and we don't need to save quite as much.
I mean, so on that, I think what you've described is a fair account of what's happened to date, but when we set a capital programme, I think the council is charging us with delivering that capital programme. And listening to Councillor Renard, there's some urgency behind the delivery of the ambitions that the council has set out. And not infrequently, the reason that we struggle to deliver as officers is because the level of officer support, the capacity to deliver, is insufficient, inadequate for the ambitions of the council in its capital programme. And so I guess if we're wanting to edge our way towards an optimum state, it would be where the capital programme is ambitious but deliverable, and therefore we don't experience these sort of significant slippages that historically that we've had, although, of course, I take your point completely, that in practice, when that happens, it tends to have an ameliorating impact on the revenue budget, which is, I think, your point.
I think I'll just also add on to that. I don't think any of us who have looked at the capital programme before are under any illusion that we're not as good at delivering capital projects as we should be. And that is something that we do need to look at. There have already been steps taken previously to look at how we can improve that. We still have a long way to go. The ideal situation is also that when we borrow money, we borrow it because we know we're definitely going to spend it, because then as soon as we can get the capital spend delivered, the purpose of spending that money is to provide a capital asset that will actually also have a return to the council as well. Councillor Wennard.
Thank you. I mean, we only borrow the money, don't we, anyway, at the point we're going to actually spend it, I suppose, is a key thing. But I think there's other issues in there. I think with houses, it's not as simple as officer ability to deliver. It's planning delays. There's been issues with contractor performance, I noticed, against a couple of the schemes in particular. So I think because I asked about this, I think when we had the workshop earlier in the year, I think that's the capital programme last financial year is the biggest we've ever delivered, isn't it, in terms of spend. So I think there's definitely a trajectory that is in the right direction, but I think there is something for us to look at. Well, actually, if we've got these priority programmes like acquisitions, for example, and the potential connected benefit to reducing homelessness, what are we doing to sort of get that resource sorted? And I'm obviously aware it's about contracting a company to come in and do a one-stop shop, but are we then prioritising that over and above other things and just being transparent with councillors and others about what might need to give way in order for those things to be prioritised? Because, at the point we set this budget, particularly the HRA one, there wasn't any protest from officers around it not being deliverable at the time.
I think you missed out an opportunity there, Tom, because you mentioned about planning, and you could have said that the new Labour government have announced some 300 new planning officers are going to be made available. Hopefully we get some of those in Bristol.
Chair, can I just come back? Just to say that obviously delivering what we want to deliver would be, our best solution. We have employed a strategic partner in Arcadis to help us deliver our capital programme, and under the old system with the scrutiny system, I tried to get them along several times to growth and regen scrutiny to quiz them about that without success. So it's something I still think it would it would be good for us to see if we're getting value for money from the company.
I don't see any reason why not. I've met with a couple of our strategic partners already, and they seem to be very keen to come and talk to us a bit further. So we'll see how we can perhaps talk to them about talking to a wider number of councillors rather than a relatively small group. Councillor Matt, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Some of the figures in here were referring to our savings challenges and not reaching our challenges, and there's been a change in sort of transformation in terms of the priority and the level of access it's had over the last few months, and I just wanted to hear a bit about, is that helping? Is the priority around our transformation projects helping, do we hope?
Yes, we have been able to focus some of the transformation monies which have been set aside as part of the budget process to drive forward at pace some of those savings which otherwise would take significantly longer. So that has brought in additional resources both in-house and in relation to support partners to drive forward some of that change. So the transformation money is demonstrating that we can move quicker. However, even with that investment, the programme isn't likely to deliver the size and scale of in-year and full-year effect which we previously anticipated. But yes, it is driving change.
Councillor Malik and then Councillor Gooch.
Tony, just a couple of points, please. Firstly, the general fund savings, I looked at, we planned 46.8 million in savings, but we only achieved 14.2 million. Is that right? Or that was at risk of not being delivered? Can we just have some, what's the main kind of obstacles to achieving the exact savings that we had planned?
There's a number of issues which sort of work their way through. So what we're saying is of the 46.8, say some of them are legacy issues, we're anticipating 32.6, so therefore 14.2 shortfall in year. Some of the savings proposals were done on a forecasting basis. So take adult care reviews. There was an assumption based into the system in relation to the level of impact that each of those reviews would have. Obviously on an average basis, as it's turning out, the reviews are actually reducing packages by a smaller percentage than was previously anticipated. So it's not that the activity is not happening, it's that the actual activity or the outcome of that activity isn't as significant. Some areas there are delays in relation to the delivery, so increasing the number of foster carers. So if you know anybody who wants to come forward as a foster carer, please encourage them, because the council could do with as many people as possible in that area. But again, we're slightly behind in relation to where we would hope to be. So it's a range of things which are driving it. Some of it is in relation to capacity, some of it is in relation to pace, and some of it broadly, once we've done further analysis, isn't deliverable in the same way. But the task then for managers is to look to see how we replace that, what we look at differently, and therefore how we can balance that overall. But yes, it's a range of different issues.
And I'd hope that you would learn, obviously officers would learn from previous errors and misforecasts.
It's never an exact science, but the sooner you start a process like this, the better and the more detailed you can be in relation to your projections, and more detailed in relation to how you resource the activity to make the change. So we have brought the budget process forward this year in order to ensure that savings proposals are given more time to bed in. We've also significantly improved, in my opinion, the process for identifying those savings and the detailed planning put in place as part of that that first phase within the savings. So I'm hopeful that moving forward we can increase the percentage of savings delivered, because even at 70%, with an optimum bias on top of that, it is still significantly below where we'd like it to be, and it is one of the issues which external audit have raised with us. We have included it within our annual government statement as well in relation to our ability to deliver value for money. So it is something which I'm seeing improvement, but that improvement will take some time to embed.
Just to add on to that very quickly, is you mentioned about audit. There is an exception report on the savings of 2023-2024, which is going to audit committee, which both yourself and Councillor Whippington attend, and Councillor Whippington chairs, with some recommendations on how they can improve the level of assurance that can be provided on those savings.
Can I just ask a related question to the carry forward of the savings? So regarding the 11.3 million of savings that are undelivered from the previous years, what steps are then taken to ensure that these savings are realised in the subsequent years?
So it's a similar process of it improving the project management and improving the delivery support in those spaces. It's fair to say that some of those savings will require alternative savings or alternative delivery mechanisms, because obviously there have been efforts made to deliver them which have been unsuccessful, and therefore there's further work to reimagine some of those in relation to how they may be delivered. Obviously, if there's anything which is significant in relation to policy terms in delivering the alternative saving, then obviously that would need to go to the policy committee for their consideration. But once we've included the savings in the medium-term financial plan, for want of a better phrase, baked in, so we assume they will be delivered one way or another. But obviously we do unfortunately have a track record of non-delivery in relation to some of that activity, which is partly what we're trying to improve.
I'll stop there.
Councillor Gooch.
Yeah, you mentioned about increasing the number of foster carers. That was something I was going to ask about, actually. Would it actually work out cheaper to increase the amount that we pay foster carers in order to reduce the number of out-of-city placements? Also, I was thinking about the schools, especially the high needs costing in schools. Again, we've got a lot of out-of-city placements with special educational needs too. Is there a way, could we even look at maybe buying up provision in local private schools that are good for send, as opposed to sending children to Birmingham in taxis, etc. You know, I'm just wondering if there are ways to kind of work around things. And then the other thing was I was going to ask about with housing. Again, with the new government, it's possible that we could write to ask about the right to buy scheme and whether or not we might be able to either keep more money from right to buy or to change the scheme so that we can actually reinvest more of it in housing and reduce our housing benefit bills. Obviously, I don't want to overstep onto other committees, but I'm just wondering if all of these things are kind of things that are in motion.
So certainly on the right to buy, I think that we're probably circumscribed by the law on that in terms of what is and isn't permissible for a local authority to do. But I think you're making very good points, which probably the respective committees will need to think about in how can we alleviate the pressures upon us by investing in foster carers, as you say, and doing what we can to recycle right to buy receipts. So I suggest, Chair, that level of detail is probably something for the relevant committees to consider.
I would agree, but I do want to respond on one thing. We have Bristol City Council has joined with 19 other councils, which between them are the largest owners of council housing in the country. This is something that I signed off, but it was previously also something that Councillor Wenard was working on. And included that is an element about some reform to right to buy, along with a host of other things, which we think we are asking for the new government to consider. We may not get all of them, we may not get any of them, but we've asked, along with all those other councillors as well. In a similar way, we have also written, as a member of the core cities, to the Prime Minister and to the Chancellor of the Exchequer about other ways that it may be possible to help and support local government. So those actions are taking place. But in terms of the detail, Paul is right, it is an area that's probably more for the other committees to look at. I can't see any more hands, so I'll go to finish this off, excuse me, my throat is going. So there are 13 items to be noted and 5 items to be voted on. So what I'll do, if it's okay, everybody, is I'll go through the items to be noted and get your approval for those, and then I'll go to the vote for the 5 items to be voted on. So bear with me as my voice hopefully doesn't give up on me before I get to the end. Is everybody okay with that? You all? Not yet. All right, so 13 items to be noted. Can I take assurance that the committee has noted those items? For the approver, however, I am going to read them out because these are financial decisions that we are making. So the motion is that the committee approves the revisions of Q1 period 2, quarter 1 period 2 to the approved capital budget to incorporate the reprofiling of 3.5 million budget movements following the approval of Cabinet and Officer Executive decisions and the reprofiling of 2.7 million prior year unspent budget carried forward. 2, further revisions to the capital budget prior to period 3 to reflect the forecast of 149.6 million underspend and its reprofiling into future years. 3, the release of 8 million corporate inflation budget as approved in the 2024-25 budget, but not initially allocated to Directorate's cash limits. 4, the forecast release of 15.2 million corporate funds, which consists of 4.6 million inflation budget and 10.6 million optimism bias savings contingency, to mitigate in part the 28.7 million forecast overspend at service level. And finally, 5, the creation of 3 new reserves to account for early years wraparound childcare, early years delivery support for early years expansion, and SCURs in financial difficulty. I'll therefore move the recommendation. Can I ask for a seconder?
Seconded.
Can I ask for all those in favour to show their hands? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you all for your comments and interventions. Thanks to the officers that survived to the end and the ones that were here earlier. Bang on 4 o'clock. There's one thing I can deliver.